Hello, your friendly neighborhood host, JT Wheely here again, back for another episode of the History of Comics podcast, this time part 3 of the life of Joe Kubert. When we last left off, Joe Kubert has ensconced himself into his work at DC, helping establish the classic Sergeant Rock character along with his classic war line, and he would continue to do so, along with going on with new ventures into the comic book medium. During this time, comic books had started becoming a family business when Joe Kubert's son Adam started to work as a letterer at the age of 12. However, Joe's professional life took a strange twist as editor when he had to reject his idol, Lou Fine, for cover art, despite having pursued him for years to do so. When the pieces arrived on Kubert's desk, he realized that years as a commercial artist had made Fine's art gorgeous, but also static, just not much of a storyteller. Kubert was able to recruit John Costanza, his letterer from the Tales from the Green Beret comic strip, and Sergio Aragones, the famous Spanish-born artist whose English skills were marginal at the time, but was able to provide some single-panel humor features for the DC war books. Working with Joe Kubert, Aragones would call him the most organic artist he'd ever seen, never knowing where his lines began or end, they were so fluid. Sadly, Joe's father, Jack, was diagnosed with lung cancer, being a smoker his entire life, but chose to forego treatment, despite doctors telling him the operation to remove the cancerous growth from his lungs would be fairly standard. He has since chosen to become a jeweler, now living in Florida. A giant opportunity did fall into Joe Kubert's professional life, though, when DC acquired the rights to Edgar Rice Burroughs' estate, with Carmen Infantino personally telling his old friend, Joe Kubert, that they wanted him to pencil Tarzan. Kubert was thrilled, as Tarzan was always his favorite fictional character, having heavily influenced his own Thor, so for him, it was a chance of a lifetime. Fans were immediately excited as well, believing the creator of Thor would be perfect for the King of the Jungle. Kubert started with a 4-part Tarzan and the Apes, the introductory story of Tarzan that gave his origin of being raised by apes in the African jungle. Kubert's work totaled 73 pages while homaging Hal Foster's original classic run, though it did take away from his work on DC's war comics. He also worked with Edgar Rice Burroughs Incorporated, ERB, and Hobart Burroughs, Edgar's son, who loved Kubert's work with minor objections, for example, saying that apes don't have claws. Kubert did get a new editorial assistant, Marv Wolfman, in 1972, after he left the career as a teacher. It would prove to be a wise career choice, Mr. Wolfman. The series even kept up Gold Key's numbering, the original comic book that ran the series, starting at number 207 on February 1972. Even further, they used photostats of the old strip for issues number 211, though it was mostly meant to save money. Later, Joe Kubert produced one-shots in the story The Return of Tarzan, along with producing covers for other Edgar Rice Burroughs property, such as Korak, the son of Tarzan, Tarzan the Lion Man, would be his third adaptation, though the series would eventually end over budget constraints. Nevertheless, the Tarzan fans were so impressed they honored Joe Kubert at the Bureau of Bibliophiles annual meeting in 1974 at the 32nd annual Worldcon on September 1st, where he was presented with the Golden Lion Award. In his acceptance speech, he thanked the fans and gave tribute to Hal Foster for setting the standard for Tarzan comics. Kubert continued to work in the Tarzan comics, adapting 2 more novels, Tarzan and the Castaways and The Jungle Murderers. By Tarzan number 250 in June of 1976, Joe Orlando was made editor, though by this point DC's 5-year contract with ERB had ended, who now moved over to Marvel. Nevertheless, Kubert's run on Tarzan remains a highlight of the series, with many calling it equal to Hal Foster's original, if not superior. Kubert continued with his comic book work, along with engaging in interviews. In one for Amazing Heroes, number 34, in November of 1983, Kubert said he drew just enough so readers could fill in the blanks between the panels. Meanwhile, Kubert decided to dust off his old Tor creation once again with Al Delaney's, a longtime fan and producer of the fanzine Near Mint. Delaney's agreed to help reproduce them, being such a fan that he would copy Kubert's art in ink just for fun, and when Kubert saw his Thor samples, he thought he would be ideal for repackaging Thor in book form. Kubert even used his old art from the defunct Thor newspaper strip, which Carmen Infantino helped write, though it was ultimately shoddy work. As Delaney was a dedicated fan, he was still an amateur artist at best. Meanwhile, Kubert did layouts for Sheldon Mayer's Old Testament series, a special Treasury edition released in 1975, with Nestor Redondo doing the finished pencils and inks, while also returning to his editorial duties over DC War Comics line. This did result in him letting go of Russ Heath, a talented perennial late artist who clashed with a true professional like Joe Kubert, who stated that a deadline is a deadline. He also found himself rejecting stories from the equally talented Alex Toth, who would change the story too much from Robert Canary's scripts. While Kubert, being a talented artist himself, trusted artists to make small changes since they were the storytellers in their own right, Toth was changing the stories completely to the point that Kubert had to reject the pencils outright. Reportedly, Toth would just throw those pages in his trunk where they would eventually be damaged by moisture. Sadly, tragedy struck when Joe Kubert's father died at the age of 81 in June of 1975, with his mother Etta dying just a few years later. As a result, Joe Kubert, being the eldest son at 48, became the head of the family, and as a de facto elder, he soon began pondering how he could pass on his knowledge to the younger generation. It would revive a decades-old plan and perhaps be one of his greatest contributions to the comic book medium. In June of 1976, the Buyer's Guide of Comic Fandom, Joe Kubert made a new step in his professional life when he announced in Inkblot's column page his intention of opening a comic book artist school. It will be housed in a beautiful mansion in Dover, New Jersey, according to the article by Howard Lucy Davis. Its name would be Joe Kubert School of Cartoon and Graphic Art, Incorporated. It was designed as a 2-year intensive studies school for telegraphics. Kubert coined the term for telling a story through picture illustration, similar to how Will Eisner also called the comic books sequential art. The ad highlighted 22 professional cartoonists who would teach there, from Will Eisner to Gil Kane. This was part of Kubert's larger plan for the comic book medium in general, as he felt the industry was still strong, despite others being pessimistic, though it was changing, with an emphasis on merchandise and adaptations, such as Superman the movie and the Incredible Hulk TV show at the time. During this time, Kubert was also approached by Stan Lee to work at Marvel, but turned him down when he learned someone else would ink his pencils. He always insisted on doing it himself, while Lee preferred someone else to ink over Kubert. The Kuberts also traveled to Europe in 1973 to the convention in Lucca, Italy. There, Joe Kubert met Sergio Bonelli, a major European publisher, and Irvin Lushmagic, who had just launched Strip Art Features, SAF, the previous year. And these two figures would play a large role in Kubert's career years later. While in Kubert, Joe was happy to discover his work was popular and that Europeans didn't look down on comic books like kid stuff in America, and encouraged Joe to develop a character just for that market, which would become Abraham Stone, a revenge story set in the early 20th century with the intention of Russ Magic's SAF marketing it. However, the demands of his new school forced him to put it on hold for now. The idea that his school went back to his apprenticeship at Harry Chesler's studio, believing the instruction he received there should be replicated in a school setting. He even tried it previously at one point in 1954 with the Comics Illustrator Instructions course with Norman Maurer, but he had to be canceled when the 3D comic books market fell out. However, during the 1960s and 70s, when fans would bring portfolios of their work, Kubert was unimpressed with their lack of basic knowledge and felt instruction was needed. Now Joe Kubert was finally going to put this idea to fruition, with its site picked at 45 Lehigh Street called the Baker Mansion, whose lineage could be traced back to 1630 from the Baker family. Their name dotted across Dover, New Jersey, from Baker Avenue to the Baker Opera House. Situated on 7 acres, it had 3 floors in the basement, along with a carriage house and a swimming pool. The Kuberts especially liked it for the dormitory space, and it would soon become a personal place for their family as well, as their daughter Lisa would be married there in 1983, the first of their children to do so. Muriel helped plan the school, and after decades of being a homemaker, was glad to get out of the house, being a highly intelligent woman with a college degree. It helped that their youngest children, Adam and Andy, were teenagers now and much more independent. Joe Kubert hired Irvin Hassan, an old friend from his DC days in the 1940s, and Hy Eisman, a more recent acquaintance from his work in American Comics Group and Gold Key, as regular instructors. Eisman was initially hesitant, having never taught there before, but the casual setting of the school, such as not having to shave on a regular basis, along with the needs of students, many never even heard of a dip pen, for example, encouraged them. He eventually specialized in lettering at the school, partly because no one else wanted to do it. Joe Kubert's school, JKS for short, had a first class of 22 students, including Steve Bissett, and he and his fellow students would later be called Cubies. Bissett's father, Richard, was discouraged by his son's chosen line of work, having served in all 4 branches of the military and launched 2 successful businesses. However, in support of his son, he drove 7 hours to the school where he met and was immediately impressed by Joe Kubert. The two immediately bonded over their past military service, and Richard Bressett was extremely impressed that Joe Kubert had a large family that he supported with his comic book career. Simply put, Joe Kubert was a living, breathing advertisement for his school. This would be one of the perks of the school for the students as well, as Kubert would teach at the school and evaluate their work in person. The coursework was extremely demanding, as Joe Kubert believed in learning through work, as it was also taught by actual professionals, such as Dick D'Argiano, Lee Ellis, and so forth. Though students noticed they hadn't taught much before, the real-world knowledge was the main appeal. Kubert himself emphasized storytelling and composition, along with the importance of meeting a deadline. Kubert believed in tough love and felt that letting the students off easy would be a waste of their money. Kubert would later state in 2003 that the school's philosophy was to give students the skills to become professional comic book artists and thus the ability to make a living doing what they loved. It was intense work, with students drawing 8 to 10 hours a day, 6 to 7 days a week, but Kubert was proud to be able to claim 80 to 90% of JKS's graduates got jobs in the comic book field, with such notable alumni as Amanda Conner and Alex Maleev. Joe Kubert also pursued a mail-order series through Alter Ego, but that fell through. He also tried to create a tabloid that was a collection of newspaper strips from various artists called Sojourn, which was inspired by his past attempt with Artists and Writers Syndicate back in the 1960s, which now also never came together. Kubert did produce a 2-page spread for Taurus Return in Sojourn number 1 in September 1977, but it only lasted for one issue. In the fall of 1978, the Kubert School expanded from 2 years to 3 of his years of instruction, as the 2-year length was considered too intensive. During this time, he also reconnected with his old boss and mentor, Harry Chesler, having done a tribute for him back in 1976 for the fanzine Manticore. It turns out Chesler has since gone into real estate and become a millionaire, but Kubert noted he still used half-price coupons at restaurants, ever the cheapskate. Kubert still had great love for the man who gave him his first job in comics and even threw him a party in his honor at the school. Chesler would die a few years later in 1981, and an oil painting of him by Jack Binder still hangs in the Joe Kubert School in his honor. Joe Kubert's son started to get more into the comic book business as well, with Adam lettering of Detective Comics number 500 with the story The Strange Death of Dr. Erdell, which was penciled by his father and written by Paul Levitz, along with representing Joe Kubert's return to the Hawkman stories. However, Adam Kubert was not even a student at Kubert School yet. He had instruction from his father since he was a kid, allowing him to earn money helping him with lettering and word balloons in his work. However, Adam was only a casual comic book fan starting out, and originally graduated with a degree from the Medical Illustration at Rochester Institute of Technology, RIT, but decided to try comic books instead afterwards. Thus, he started work at JKS in the fall of 1981 with his brother Andy. Andy previously took classes at Morris County Vo-Tech, which awakened his interest in art, and also taught classes at RIT, specializing in packaging design. Hy Eisman said he was the most hopeless first-year student at JKS, but he eventually got by. To help inspire his son, Joe Kubert showed Andy classic comic books, such as Comic Book Guide with Hal Foster and Alex Raymond, to get him motivated. Meanwhile, Joe soon found the school taking up more and more of his time that he had to do comic book work at the school. He originally hoped to let someone else handle the administrative side while just teaching one class a week, but that soon wasn't the case. Finally, Kubert moved his studio into the school itself so he could work. On August of 1982, Joe Kubert was interviewed in the Spirit Quarterly by Will Eisner, where the two discussed art and writing and how they used photos for references but not tracing. To both, tracing was just swiping an image, while referencing photos was used to inspire your drawings but still making your own image. It was also renewed Kubert and Eisner's friendship, as they hadn't seen each other in years. While Eisner did get Joe Kubert interested in doing graphic novels after Eisner's success with A Contract with God. In 1983, The Redeemer was announced at DC, described in Amazing Heroes number 34 for 12 issues as a maxi series. Limited series ran for 4 to 6 issues most of the time. The story was to be about Jim Torkin, who was constantly reincarnated in his battle with the Infernal One. However, Joe Kubert was editing 10 books at a time, thus it was never published, though he did produce at least 4 of the comics. Despite having never released them, DC never asked for the royalties they paid Kubert in advance for it, but he decided he wanted to own it outright, so he paid DC back anyway. Graphic novels were on hold for now, but like many of Joe Kubert's ideas, he would eventually get back to them. With the JKS school expanding, the Kuberts bought the Dover High School, which had 100,000 square feet, 35 classrooms, a gym, and a 600-seat stadium. The student class had gotten so big they had to install mobile homes outside the original space. The move would be made in 1985, while the school was also produced its first Joe Kubert Presents folio, number 1, on March 1984, which featured strips by the students at 50 cents apiece, along with a list of the JKS graduates who had moved into the marketplace. While not listed, Adam and Andy had moved into professional comic book work as well, helping DC revive Doc Savage from the pulp magazines, while also switching penciling and inking chores between issues doing so. They both got married as well during this time, with Andy, like his sister, on the grounds of the original of Baker Mansion, the original site of the JKS. It always surprised Joe Kubert that 2 of his kids would follow in his profession, as he never hid how hard it was or glamorized his work in the comic book industry. To Joe, it was nothing short than a miracle. Sadly, Joe's longtime friend Norman Maurer died of cancer on November 23, 1986, in Los Angeles. After leaving the comic book business, Maurer moved on to TV producing and writing, notably helping make the Scooby-Doo and Richie Rich cartoons in the 1970s. JKS established a scholarship in his name, at which the second-year students are awarded $1,000 toward their tuition. Norman's widow, Joanne, and their sons administered it, with each winner's name placed on the Norman Maurer commemorative plaque, which is still prominently displayed in the school. Another sad moment in Joe Kubert's life, this time professionally, Sergeant Rock was canceled at DC with issue number 422 on July of 1988. At this point, though, Joe Kubert was only doing the covers with his son Andy, even penciling some recent issues, but was no longer the editor. For the last issue, a story about Sergeant Rock helping with the D-Day drive runs was produced. It was written by Robert Kanier, one of his last comic scripts, with Joe penciling, while his son Andy lettered and inked, while Adam colored the story, making it a true family affair. Despite the cancellation of Sergeant Rock, Joe Kubert remained as busy as ever, from his comics work to his school, and he soon got even busier. At the request of Rabbi David Shalom, Pape, Kubert did some cartoons for the Mosaic Comic Times, which featured 2 pages a month of Yaakov and Isaac. Kubert tried to beg off, though Dr. Pape was able to convince him to do just 1 or 2 pages a month. Hard to say no to a rabbi. With this work, it led to a renewal of Joe Kubert's Jewish face and would later be recollected in 2004. Back at JKS, Joe Kubert created a correspondence course with his old friend Bob Bean, who has since become a film producer, including helping develop The Natural starring Robert Redford. He also started making Joe Kubert's World of Cartooning while publicizing the schools at conventions. It was during these conventions in 1989 that Joe Kubert reconnected with Harvey Kurtzman over their old artwork, with Joe pointing out panels that got him fired from EC and Harvey agreeing with him, still criticizing Kubert's art after all these years. Joe Kubert also reconnected with Irvin Rustmagic, who introduced him to the European comics. The 2 families would visit each other while trading correspondence, and Joe and Muriel even went to Mostar, Bosnia to visit Irwin and his family. Together, Joe and Irwin developed Abraham Stone in 1991 for the graphic novel Country Mouse City Rat, published by Malibu Comics Platinum Editions. An early 1900s tale of revenge, it would be Joe Kubert's first adult comic book. In the story, a young man seeks out revenge against a financial magnate known only as Mr. Pullman, who murdered his mom and younger brother. After completing his revenge, Joe Kubert would write 2 more stories about Abraham Stone in 1995 for Epic Comics, with Radix Malorium, in which Stone travels to early 1900s America, where he gets involved in the movies, and The Revolution, where he meets Pancho Villa as part of the 3-book epic. Despite some historical inaccuracies, such as the dates of the Great War to Charlie Chaplin's The Gold Rush movie, the books were well received and sold well, at least overseas. Kubert was planning more adventures with the character, but was soon distracted when his classic character, Thor, came up again. Fans have been clamoring for Thor to return for years, and Carl Potts offered Joe Kubert the option to do the series at Marvel in 1992 as part of a heavy-hitting series of creator-owned books. Joe Kubert changed Thor from fighting dinosaurs to anthropomorphic savages in a 4-part miniseries, in which he rescues a beautiful woman from them while pondering his morality in this savage world, resulting in him seeking revenge against Klar, the man who killed his mother and father and seized control of their clan. In 1994, Joe Kubert was interviewed by Gary Goff for the Comics Journal in issue number 172 of November, where he found himself defending publishers against Dave Sim, who believed they were all out to cheat comic book creators out of their money. Kubert countered that while they were all businessmen, many like Paul Levitz and Jim Shooter were good people wanting for everyone to succeed. During this same interview, Kubert also stated he preferred drawing over teaching and non-superhero stories to superheroes. He also addressed how some people thought he was an angry person, with Kubert stating it was just his self-confidence. His son Andy called his father the most self-assured person he ever met. It will be something that puzzles anyone who knew Kubert, even his students at JKS, as he always stated his door was open, but few would venture in fear of him. Meanwhile, his sons Andy and Adam were soon getting tons of work at Marvel when many of their top artists left to form Image Comics, so they started getting to work on Ghost Rider and Wolverine and later the X-Men stories. Joe Kubert worked at Marvel himself doing the Punisher War Journal, a character who was a perfect fit for Kubert's art style, in 1994 with writer Chuck Dixon, which gave Kubert the opportunity to try computerized coloring for the first time. Kubert always enjoyed trying new technologies. Also, per Kubert, he only accepted the job at Marvel if he could do everything, from pencils, inking, lettering, and coloring, with only the script by Dixon. His personal life was shining as well, as he and Muriel were becoming grandparents of numerous grandchildren. Having 5 kids does pay off. However, they started to receive faxes from friends across the ocean who were going through a far more distressing time. And we will leave you here for now, but when we return, we will get through what those events were in Europe that will not only have an effect on Joe Kubert's personal life, but also his professional one, and will lead to arguably one of his greatest works he ever would produce. And now it is August 14th, 2025, time for the favorite comic of the week. Trinity, Daughter of Wonder Woman, number 3 by Tom King and Belen Ortega, which finds the adult Trinity in a time trying to rescue a Batman corgi. Yes, I said that, and it's as fun as it sounds. Only this time to run into her mother, Wonder Woman, who's fighting a Cerebus, and well, things don't go as planned, and well, thankfully Trinity has a time machine, so she keeps bouncing back to fix it, but she can't quite get it right until finally her father, Steve Treasure, shows up to give a helping hand. Tom King once again crafts a very fun series that has plays a lot of humor, especially with the different age Trinities bouncing off each other, and especially seeing the younger Trinities, the kid and the teenage one, berating the adult one who's supposed to be the smartest, but she keeps making like classic mistakes. But also, there's a nice little bit of drama in there when Trinity does meet her father, and she starts to realize maybe she's a lot like her dad as well as her mom. This, of course, is masked by Belen Ortega's gorgeous art, which is great for the action set pieces and so forth, but also has a nice little cartoony style to it. Not that much, because it still tells a serious story, but enough where it really plays the humor perfectly. All in all, this is just a fun series from the end, probably DC's most fun series to date, or at least recently, and Trinity remains one of my favorite new DC characters. So, with that, we will conclude with this reposting of the life of the great Joe Kubert. Join me next week for the concluding chapter from the archived editions. And until then, go and enjoy yourself a comic book. If you can, definitely check out Trinity. That is just easily one of DC's most fun comics right now.